Perfect. Thank you, Alex. Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the January 13th Board of Investment meeting. Happy New Year. Linda has a couple things that she needs to read, and then we're going to move forward with the board elections. Linda?
Thank you, Mr. Green. The meeting is being conducted as a virtual meeting, so I will do a roll call of the trustees to confirm attendance. Mr. Knox?
Here.
Mr. Santos?
Present.
Thank you. Mr. Kehoe?
I'm here.
Thank you. Ms. Greenwood?
I am here as well.
Thank you. Mr. Oakham?
Here, Bonnie. I mean, Linda.
Here. Mr. Bernstein?
Here.
Haven't seen you in a year.
Oh. Yeah, have everybody?
Mr.
Can
Kelly?
I'm here.
Wait, Mr. Kelly?
I'm
Thank
here.
you, Mr. Kelly. Ms. Sanchez? Yeah, I got you, Mr. Kelly. Ms. Sanchez? Mr. Green?
I'm here. Thank you.
Okay. Staff participating in the meeting include the following: CEO Santos Cramen, Chief Investment Officer John Grable, Chief Counsel Stephen Rice, Chief Financial Officer Ted Granger, HR Division Manager Carly DeToya, Principal Investment Officers Jude Perez, Bacha Masarajian, Jim Rice, Chris Wagner, Ted Wright, and John McClellan. Senior Investment Officers David Chu and Scott Drazel, Investment Officers Ahmed Agarwal, Trina Sanders, David Simpson, Derek Kong, Senior Investment Analyst Group, Hope Fernandez and Natalie Walker from Stepstone Group, Rob Coaches and Felix Fells from the Townsend Group, Mark White and James Walsh from Alborn, and Ashmi Marota and Lauren Costa from JP Morgan Private Equity Group. Trustees, if you have a comment or question on any item, please use the Zoom chat option to be placed in the queue, or you may contact me directly. At this time, we ask all meeting participants to mute their mics until you're ready to speak. And now we may proceed with the agenda.
Thank you, Linda. Thanks very much. So this morning, to start off the meeting, we're going to have elections for board chair, vice chair, secretary, JOG-C member, and 3 audit committee members. During the election for each position, I'll ask for a nomination from the trustees. As these are the nominations and not motions, no second is required for nominations. Are there any questions?
Sure.
Okay.
Go ahead. Sorry.
The first election will be for board chair. Is there any nominations for the board chair position?
Sure. I'll nominate Keith Knox.
Great. I would second that. Though I don't need to. Is there any objection? Okay. Congratulations, Mr. Knox.
Thank you.
Is there any nominations for the vice chair position?
I nominate Joe Kelly.
I nominate Elizabeth Greenwood.
Okay, so there's a nomination for Joe Kelly and there's a nomination for Elizabeth Greenwood. So we first one I heard is for Joe Kelly. So Steve Rice, I'm going to make sure I do this correct and according to procedure. So we'll just go through and do a voice vote of the trustees. Is that correct?
Yes, we have historically gone through the roll call and let the trustees state their preference.
Oh.
However, strict Brown Act would be to vote for to have a roll call vote of the candidates in the order in which they were nominated.
Okay.
So that would be Mr. Kelly and then Ms. Greenwood.
Okay, sounds good. So let's go ahead and do a roll call vote, please, Linda.
Okay. Mr. Knox?
This is for Mr. Kelly.
Correct.
Aye.
Thank you. Mr. Santos?
No.
Mr. Kehoe?
Aye.
Miss Greenwood? Miss Greenwood?
No. Forgot to press the unmute button.
Mr. Oakham?
Aye, yes.
Mr. Bernstein?
Aye.
Mr. Kelly?
Yes.
Miss Sanchez?
No.
Chair Green?
No.
Okay, the motion passes with 5 yeses and 4 nos.
So congratulations, Mr. Kelly is the vice chair. The next position is secretary.
I nominate Mr. Bernstein.
Okay. Is there any objection or any other nominations? Congratulations, Mr. Bernstein, you're the secretary. Then the next item is the JOG C committee member.
I nominate Mr. Keough.
I nominate Doug Green.
Okay, I heard Mr. Kehoe is a nomination first, so Mr. Kehoe has been nominated for the JOG C.
Okay. Mr. Knox?
Aye.
Mr. Santos?
This is for Mr. Kehoe?
Correct.
No.
Mr. Kehoe?
Aye.
Miss Greenwood?
No.
Mr. Oakham?
Yes.
Mr. Bernstein?
Aye.
Mr. Kelly?
Yes.
Miss Sanchez?
No.
Mr. Green?
No.
Okay, the motion passes with 5 yeses and 4 nos.
Great. The next is for the 3 audit committees. Is there a nomination for the audit committee?
I nominate Gina Sanchez.
Okay,
I nominate Joe Kelly.
okay,
I nominate
I-
John
I-
Kehoe.
I nominate Herman Santos.
okay. Let me make sure I capture all that. So I heard I heard Gina Sanchez, Joe Kelly, Sean Kehoe. Did I get that right in order?
Yes, yes.
Okay. Is there any other nominations?
Herman
And Herman
Santos.
Santos.
And Herman Santos, 4. Okay, so Steve, so there's 4 nominations, 3 positions.
Again, the Brown Act would require the
Great.
vote to be in order of
Okay.
nomination.
You got it. Okay. So let's go ahead and do that, please.
Okay, so the first person is going to be for Gina Sanchez, the first vote. Mr. Knox?
Aye.
Mr. Santos?
Yes.
Mr. Kehoe?
Aye.
Miss Greenwood?
Aye.
Mr. Oakham?
Aye.
Mr. Bernstein?
Aye.
Mr. Kelly?
Yes.
Miss Sanchez?
Yes.
Mr. Green?
Yes.
Okay, motion passes unanimously. Next one is for Joe Kelly. Mr. Knox?
Aye.
Mr. Santos? Mr. Santos?
No.
Mr. Kehoe?
Aye.
Miss Greenwood?
Yes.
Mr. Oakham?
Yes.
Mr. Bernstein?
Aye.
Mr. Kelly?
Sorry, Linda,
Mr.
can you say
Kelly?
it again? Oh, go ahead.
Mr. Kelly?
Yes.
Okay. Miss Sanchez?
Yes.
Mr. Green?
No.
Okay, motion passes 7-2. Next person is going to be Mr. Kehoe. Mr. Knox?
Aye.
Mr. Santos?
Yes.
Mr. Kehoe?
Aye.
Miss Greenwood?
No.
Mr. Oakham,
Yes.
Mr. Bernstein,
Aye.
Mr. Kelly,
yes,
Ms. Sanchez,
No.
Mr. Green.
No.
Okay, the motion passes with 6 yes and 3 no's. Next one is for Mr. Santos.
That would
I
conclude
think
the
we're done.
election.
Oh, yeah, sorry.
We have three.
Okay. In the order, okay.
Great. Thank you. Thank you, Linda, and thank you, Mr. Rice. I think that, did I cover all the elections? Did I get everything?
Yes.
Okay, terrific. Then it's my pleasure to turn this meeting over to the 2021 Board Chair, Mr. Knox. Take it away. Good luck.
Thank you very much. Appreciate the nominations and the support. Start by thanking Mr. Green and Mr. Santos for their leadership and hard work last year as chair and vice chair respectively. Looking forward to working with Mr. Kryman, Mr. Grable, and the team. I believe that I still get one appointment to the JOG C, Mr. Rice. Is that correct?
Yes, that is correct.
Okay, I'd like to go ahead and make that now. That would be Miss Greenwood, assuming she would be accepting of that.
I would be. Thank you very much.
Okay, with that, I like to be efficient, so let's get started. Item 3, the minutes are before us. Unless there are any questions, is there a motion to approve?
So moved.
Second.
Okay, Linda, do you want to call the roll?
Sure. Actually, I'm gonna have to change the order really, sorry.
I don't have to be first
Okay.
anymore.
Yeah, you're switching spots with Mr. Green. Mr. Green? For the-
Yes, aye. Thank you, Linda.
Mr. Santos,
Aye.
Mr. Kehoe,
Aye.
Ms. Greenwood,
Aye.
Mr. Oakham,
Yes.
Mr. Bernstein,
Aye.
Mr. Kelly, Mr. Kelly,
yes,
okay, Ms. Sanchez,
Aye.
okay, and Chair Knox.
Aye.
Okay, the motion passes unanimously.
Item 4, report on closed session items, Mr. Rice.
Good morning, Chair and trustees. We have 4 board actions from prior meetings to report out today. However, instead of stating these reports orally, as has been done in the past, starting with this meeting, we will include them in the written report that is posted on LACERA.com after each meeting with the closed session actions that are immediately reportable from today. As I said, this change will continue into the future. This will save time during the board's busy meetings, and it will also improve transparency by placing all closed session reports in a single online location. This change is in line with the Brown Act. So with that, the report is completed. Thank you.
Thank you. Item 5, public comment. Linda, have we received requests from the public to speak?
Yes, we have received 2 requests from the public to address the board. We will have Mr. Moore address the board at this time. Mr. Moore, please enter *6 to unmute yourself. And you will have 3 minutes to address the board, and you may begin now. Mr. Moore?
Yes, okay.
Yes, you can go ahead.
Good morning, board members. In the emerging manager report presentation, agenda item 10C, there is a declarative statement on slide 7. The higher risk investment and operational associated with emerging managers. This is an inherently pejorative statement. It paints a picture for the public and the board that emerging managers are incontrovertibly risky. I know this full well is not true. 2 years ago, LACERA's portfolio contained 2 managers with $900 million in assets under management who underperformed their benchmark over 7 years. During the same period, a minority female emerging manager outperformed the same index with only 168 million in assets. When the underperformers were finally fired, the overperforming emerging manager was not even considered for an additional allocation prior to my intervention. 2 points. 1, the board must end this deleterious characterization of emerging and minority managers. Speculation, stereotyping, implicit and explicit bias cannot substitute for facts. 2, there should be no reason outside performance that emerging managers should not be considered for additional fund allocations when we are rebalancing our portfolio. Providing equitable access to funding is important to the long-term growth and profitability of top-performing emerging managers, and this is good for public pension funds, including LACERA. From slide 11, the board should establish specific goals for its London-based emerging manager hedge fund separate account manager for including U.S.-based women, African-American, and Hispanic-owned companies in their portfolio and in their ongoing monitoring programs. After all, these are LA County taxpayer funds. With regard to the private equity program presentation in agenda item 10D, there is a lot of data presented, but here are some useful information that might be more valuable and actionable. A list of companies that JP Morgan has invested in and how they have been classified as diverse in accordance with the EEOC classification guidelines. How much money was each of these firms allocated, and what are their current valuations and distributions? And 3, how much is being paid in fees and expenses in the same level of detail that is in the AB 2833 annual reports? And by the way, we should have the same information from our own staff for our entire portfolio, as they reported in December that 6.4% of fund assets are managed by and 12.1% of all fees are paid to women and minority firms. Where is that list? Thank you.
Linda, are we set for the next speaker?
Damian Good. Yes, we're calling on Damian Goodman. Mr. Goodman?
Good morning.
Good morning, Mr. Goodman. You can go ahead and address the board.
Good morning, LACERA board members and new chair Knox and officers. My name is Damian Goodman. I'm a board member of Downtown Crenshaw Rising. At the December LACERA board meeting, then Chair Green stated that the Baldwin Hills Crenshaw Plaza would be listed and discussed at this meeting. The agenda will reflect that it is not, and since the item is not listed, one must presume that per the Brown Act, the item will not be discussed at today's Board of Investments meeting. It is now very well known and has been reported at other pension fund board meetings that Live Work purchase and sale agreement was terminated as of December 11th. When the asset, the Crenshaw Mall, is proposed to be sold, we are here again to reiterate the Downtown Crenshaw Rising Development Team of global award-winning firms, backed by the best of investors, looks forward to sitting down with you and the other pension fund boards to identify a win-win. Our offer remains 5% over the next most credible offer. Thank you so much.
Thank you. That concludes public comment.
Thank you very much. Moving on to item 6, Chief Executive Officer's report. Mr. Kryman.
Yes, good morning. And first, Happy New Year to those of you that I haven't spoken to. I would like to first begin by thanking Mr. Green and also Mr. Santos for their leadership last year as for the Board of Investments. It was an extraordinary year. I think that that under their leadership and with the assistance of all the trustees, I'm grateful for all the support that we received last year. It was an interesting ride so to speak, and they've made themselves available day and night when we need to discuss certain items. And so I'm grateful for that. And I just wanted to say thank you for your leadership last year. I also wanted to welcome Mr. Kelly and Mr. Oakham to the Board of Investments. We're looking forward to working with you moving forward, making sure that LACERA stays financially strong and that we're able to meet our obligations next year and the years moving forward as well. So there's only three things that I really want to bring up that's different from my report. My report is in the file, and I'm more than happy to answer any questions. But I did want to mention that our Deputy Chief Executive Officer exam is out on the street now. And so we're looking forward to working with our consultant, Alliance Resource Consulting, to assist us with identifying candidates for that particular position. So that is out as of this morning, I believe. And so if there's anyone that you feel would be interested in that particular position, please feel free to let me know, and then I will make sure that Carly gets that information over to our consultant. I did want to let you know also that we had our first business continuity exercise on Monday. It was a very successful exercise. Our management team did a wonderful job working through all of the issues as part of our tabletop, which was a exercise, which was an active shooter scenario. And so we worked through all of those particular issues. Our business continuity plan worked very, very well. We do have some gaps in communication and a couple of other areas that we need to address. We plan on putting together an after-action review and moving it forward and discussing it as part of our Operations Oversight Committee in the next month or two. The other thing also is that you should know that this is day 3 of our disaster recovery plan exercise that we're undergoing at this particular point in time. It's a 3-day event. On Monday, we were able to stand up our databases in Boulder, Colorado, where we have our disaster site in order to replicate our database systems or IBM systems in Boulder. Yesterday, we were successful in standing up many of our mainframe systems and our critical systems. And today, we're in the process of verifying all of our connections, and we're going to go ahead and run our monthly payroll and verify that our workspace and our member portal functionality is operational as well. And so we will also perform an after-action review and go to our over the OOC in order to talk about some of the challenges that we have. The 2 exercises will also assist us with preparing our annual budget, which is also underway at this particular point in time for 2021-22. So with that, I'd like to, I'm more than happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Any questions?
I have a comment for Mr. Santos. Mr. Santos, thank you for that. But I also wanted to acknowledge that, in fact, these past 10 or 11 months have been one big continuity exercise for you and the team under the pandemic. And I think you should take credit for that, because I think you've all done a great job. So thank you.
Well, thank you for that.
Okay, seeing no other questions, comments, moving on. Item 7, Chief Investment Officer's report, Mr. Grable.
Excuse me. Good morning, Mr. Knox, Chair Knox. Like Mr. Kryman, want to thank the 2020 Board of Investments, all the trustees, including Mr. Green and Mr. Santos as chair and vice chair for all the support and all the leadership last year. And on behalf of the investment office, we look forward to working with all trustees in 2021, and we congratulate the new board officers. And thank you, Noah, for driving the slides today. If we can turn to slide number 4, please. Thank you, Noah. As the slide shows, 2020 was an unbelievable 12-month period in the capital markets, notwithstanding the pandemic. Global equity markets were up 16.3% in 2020. US equity index, indicated in the chart in the upper right, the Russell 3000, was up almost 21% in 2020. The US bond benchmark in the lower right was up 7.5% in 2020. And this would translate into a US 60-40 portfolio up 15.5%. That's just an amazing number. And I wish we can allocate with the benefit of hindsight, but we can't. And we certainly recognize that in our investment beliefs, where we state that sequence matters. And to punctuate that, we would not have picked that portfolio in March, the 60-40 portfolio, because it would have dramatically underperformed. Slide 5, please. I'll focus a bit on the GDP, the gross domestic product chart on the top left, and it's not quite right on the point, but it's an important pivot from the prior slide. A recent report from the World Bank forecasts that the 2020s may be a lost decade. The World Bank's lowering global growth estimates for two main reasons. The first is lower trade and investment as a result of the pandemic. The second are disruptions in education that will hamper later productivity gains. And that really is profound in a tragic way. The previous 2.1% forecast for the 2020s is now forecast to be 1.9% at full employment and capacity. And that 20 basis point reduction, really, if you annualize 20 basis points for 10 years on a $90 trillion economy, that translates into about $2 trillion. $2 trillion is Italy, which is the world's 8th largest economy. So in some sense, that puts into perspective how big an impact a 20 basis point reduction in forecast is, or $2 trillion is 3 LA counties. So it really is a big reduction. As the chart on the top left also shows, that 2020 was a down year for global GDP. The World Bank does forecast growth, albeit slower. And as this relates to the strategic asset allocation that we're embarking upon this year, we need to be cautious because we should not asset allocate with a recency bias. If we could turn to slide 7, please. This chart shows recent themes and what to watch. One of the recent themes that maybe we should move to what to watch is the US dollar, which is on the bottom left, is an interesting story in 2021. Slide 13, and we could stay on this slide, but slide 13 will show that over the last decade, we've made about $900 million with our global equity currency hedge based upon an appreciating dollar. We'll evaluate that hedge in the equity committee over the next couple of months, but a weak dollar does have implications for capital markets. US multinational equities versus non-US equities, commodities that are priced in dollars, a local currency versus US denominated emerging market debt, and foreign direct investment into and out of the United States. And that's just to name a few. So I think the dollar will be an interesting story to watch with portfolio implications in 2021. Slide 9, please. As the chart shows, November was a strong month for the fund. It was up 6.6%, and that's almost our annual actuarial target. The estimated market value of the fund as of the end of November was $63.8 billion. As of today, it's a little over $66 billion. We have plenty of liquidity, and the right column shows where we are vis-a-vis our targets, and in particular, we are overweight in equities, and that's indicative of the strong equity markets that we discussed on slide number 4. Slide 10, please. The OPEB trust is on the bottom part of this page. It was up 10.5% for November net. The balance is $1.8 billion, and fiscal year to date, the OPEB trust is up 13%. and that has an actuarial target of 6%. And that increase is a function of the higher equity allocation. And the last slide that I'll discuss briefly is slide 17, please. Each month, staff, we put in a chart of the month from different groups. This month is from the portfolio analytics team, and it discussed SPACs, which are special purpose acquisition companies or blank check companies, and they're an alternative traditional public equity offerings. They're originated by many private equity sponsors, and effectively they're shell companies that look for a target to merge with. They're much less transparent than traditional public offerings. Hedge funds and other forms of fast-ish money have historically used SPACs as a vehicle for a quick arbitrage. As the chart on the left shows, SPACs accounted for over half of IPO capital raised last year. The chart on the right shows that post-merger with the acquisition target, the relative performance of SPACs. And they've tended to dramatically underperform. They have higher fees, potential conflicts of interest, and SPACs may not be fully consistent with our corporate governance principles. We're trying to arrange for next month for the Corporate Governance Committee, a speaker from the SEC, and a discussion of SPACs may be a good question for that speaker from the SEC. And with that, Mr. Chair, I'm happy to stand for questions.
Questions from the group? Hearing none.
Just one comment, Mr. Grable. You couldn't have put a finer point on a more frustrating topic as SPACs. It is shocking to see the amount of capital, and I think it's indicative of just how much excess liquidity is sloshing around in the system, that not only are SPACs on the rise meteorically, but as is cryptocurrencies, which are effectively currencies backed by nothing. So we are now, as a nation and a world, investing in companies that are not real companies and currencies that are backed by nothing, which I think is a statement about where we are in terms of excess liquidity and a warning as to how much value is really out there.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments? Seeing, hearing none. Thank you, Mr. Grable. Next item, item 8 for consent, recommendation by the Equity Public-Private Committee that the board approve proposed changes to the investment guidelines to clarify tracking error, affirm currency hedge, and establish parameters for cash overlay. Is there a motion to approve?
So moved.
Moved by Ms. Sanchez,
Seconded.
seconded by Mr. Oakham. Please call the roll, Linda.
Mr. Green,
Aye.
Mr. Santos,
Yes.
Mr. Kehoe,
Aye.
Ms. Greenwood,
Aye.
Mr. Oakham,
Aye.
Mr. Bernstein,
Aye.
thank you, Mr. Kelly,
Yes.
Ms. Sanchez,
Yes.
Chair Knox.
Yes.
Okay, the motion passes unanimously.
Thank you. Item 9, non-consent, recommendation by Mr. McClelland and team. This is to select Stepstone to provide real estate consulting services. Mr. McClelland?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, we can.
Excellent. Good morning. Congratulations, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. I'm pleased to be here this morning to present the results of the request for proposal that's been conducted for a real estate consultant. As you may recall, consultant contracts typically cover a 5-year term. And the contract with our current consultant, the Townsend Group, is nearing the end of its 5-year period. It's set to expire in June of this year. The current search was authorized by the Board of Investments in September of last year, and it was conducted in compliance with the procurement policy for investment-related services. We would like to thank David Green and John Grable for participating in the interview process. The RFP elicited responses from 7 interested parties. Interestingly, 3 of the 4 finalists are firms that are already providing consulting services to LACERA. We especially appreciated their participation in this search effort. Now, if you could go to slide 3, the presentation today supports staff's recommendation that the board select StepStone to provide real estate consulting services. Tara will now continue the presentation.
Thanks, John. Good morning, Chair and trustees. I'm going to begin on slide 5. I'll start with a quick overview of real estate. The role of real estate has 3 core components: income generation, hedge against inflation, and diversification. The role is defined as part of the strategic asset allocation and is outlined in the investment policy statement. On the next slide, you'll see information on the current real estate portfolio. The total portfolio has $5.1 billion in assets, with about 80% invested in separate accounts, with the remainder invested in commingled funds. Moving into the evaluation process and timeline, starting on slide 8. In September of last year, the board approved the minimum qualification and scope of services. The real estate consultant would provide recommendations on long-term policy objectives and strategy, would conduct due diligence, provide quarterly performance reports, assist board and staff in conducting searches for managers, and in evaluating the portfolio. The consultant would also provide education to the board. On the next slide, the evaluation team is shown, which consists of representatives from real estate, real assets, and portfolio analytics. The team and participants' main considerations and influences are outlined on this slide. Those considerations and influences include the strength of the firm's professional team, their research and analytics tools and capabilities, their diligence process, both for operational and for investment due diligence, and also LACERA's initiatives. On slide 10, you'll see the timeline of the overall process. The team began with 7 respondents, and each member scored each response based on various categories that will be shown later in this presentation. Next in the process, round 1 virtual interviews were scheduled with 5 of the 7 firms. Mr. Green and the CIO participated in these interviews. For round 2 virtual interviews, there were 4 firms who were each asked to demonstrate technology platforms. And lastly, we performed reference checks for each of the 4 finalist firms, and that brings us to today's recommendation. And now I'm going to turn the presentation over to Trina Sanders, and she's going to discuss observations and rankings.
Thank you, Tara. Good morning, Mr. Chairman and trustees. I'm on page 12. This table shows you the results after reading the responses to the RFP and interviews. 5 of the highest ranking respondents advanced to the first round of interviews. There were 2 sets of interviews in which RC Elco did not advance to the second round. Next slide. After each evaluation team read and scored each proposal, we got together to collaborate on the results of the scores and compiled all of the scores for an average score. We also had interviews in which we were able to interact with the proposed LACERA team. We reviewed the process and procedures that each candidate had in place. We also considered LACERA's initiatives, which included diversity and inclusion and operational due diligence, which resulted in the final ranking as shown at the bottom of this page. On slide 14, this page shows you the results of the combination of the scores from the written responses and interviews. The scores are based on 6 categories: organization, professional staff, technology, research, consultant experience, and fees. On the left is the list of finalists. On the right side is the average scores and the ranking. Under each consultant is a score for each category. As a reminder, the final scores include the written responses, the interviews, and the best and final fee offers. We were also familiar with the 3 of the firms, given their existing relationship with LACERA. These scores, however, reflect views exclusively for real estate capabilities. Each of the 4 firms have scores that were sufficient to rank them as finalists, but the evaluation team consistently ranked StepStone the highest in each category. On page 15, this page shows the best and final fees. I'd like to call your attention that if StepStone is selected by your board, they will have the lowest fee after the 10% discount for real estate and also a 10% discount for private equities. On slide 16, this table illustrates the results of LACERA's questions regarding the diversity and inclusion. At the bottom, each firm has listed their initiatives and strategies to increase diversity and inclusion at their firm. Now we'll hand it over to Amit to talk about the recommendation.
Thank you, Trina. Good morning and Happy New Year, Mr. Chair and trustees. Moving on to slide number 18. The evaluation team recommends that the board select StepStone as LACERA's real estate consultant. I will now outline some of the rationale for the evaluation team's recommendation. Moving on to the next slide. StepStone meets and exceeds each one of the outlined desired capabilities that were outlined in the scope of work, which are part of the RFP. StepStone has the largest number of real estate dedicated professionals of the 4 finalists. Their market knowledge and research was top ranked by the evaluation team. Manager due diligence reports were very thorough. StepStone has proven technology that helps with modeling cash flows, pacing, and liquidity. The firm has experience consulting with their clients and developing of investment policy, objectives, and strategies. Moving on to the next slide. This slide further describes the characteristics of the StepStone's real estate group, the depth of the firm's real estate experience, their governance with covered operational due diligence, their values which outline their ESG policy, which includes diversity and inclusion, and finally their team which covered their global presence. The firm was established in 2007, and in 2014 the real estate group was formed. The team was further enhanced by the acquisition of Cortland in 2018. Cortland was itself an established and reputable real estate consulting firm. StepStone advises clients with real estate capital allocations of over $96 billion. The firm has 19 offices globally, and the real estate group has 8 offices with 63 employees. StepStone is attentive to ESG and incorporates ESG into their due diligence process, with a commitment to further refine with market practice. They're also active in industry efforts, which LACERA is also supportive of, such as PRI and SASB. StepStone has a robust due diligence process that includes initial and final screening, due diligence, and investment committee review. They also have a strong ODD process that covers potential risks relating to operational aspects of an investment. Moving on to the next slide. There are many merits of selecting StepStone. Firstly, they are well-resourced and experienced team. The staff of the firm have had direct experience in all aspects of real estate. They have strong technology with their 2 proprietary systems, Omni and SPY. Omni is a web-based application for private market portfolio analytics and reporting. SPY is StepStone's research system.
By the way, Ev, you're still not doing work. What's her name?
Someone's not on mute.
Yeah, everybody please mute if you're not presenting. Thank you.
Sorry about that. I'm going to continue. So Omni is a web-based application for private market portfolio analytics and reporting. SPY is StepStone's research system. They have a strong and diverse team that includes both minorities and women. The firm has a global presence with offices in North America, Asia, and Europe. StepStone currently provides consulting services to the private equity and is well regarded by this group. Moving on to the next slide. We have listed a number of areas of concerns on this slide. For example, StepStone acquired Cortland's real estate business in 2018. While this consolidation may have been challenging, it appears to have been accomplished, and the combined organization seems stronger and resulted in minimal disruptions. The firm had a recent IPO that led the firm being 20 to 30% publicly owned. However, StepStone Real Estate retains 50% ownership. It is also noteworthy that 2 of the members are new to the firm. However, these new members bring diverse and strong experience in all aspects of real estate. Additionally, the other 2 members that will be working on the LACERA account have been at StepStone for over 5 years. I would now like to hand the presentation over to Jen to provide the concluding comments. Thank you.
Thank you, Amit, and good morning, Chair Knox and other trustees and the board. Noah, could you pull up go back to slide 3 in this presentation? Thank you. To conclude our comments, staff is recommending that the board approve StepStone as LACERA's real estate consultant. Our evaluation team believes that StepStone provides the best package of team consulting experience, research capabilities, and technology resources to assist LACERA in optimizing its real estate program. We've also included in the appendix a summary of staff's evaluation of the other 3 finalist firms that were interviewed. At this point, we'd be happy to take any questions you might have.
Thank you, Ms. Sanders, Ms. Elijah, Mr. Agarwal, Mr. Rice. I love the acronym SPY. I do have Mr. Kelly in the queue to go first.
Thank you very much. I want to thank the staff for the presentation. I thought it was really well done. I like that all staff participated. And thank you, Noah, for being the slide guy. I had a few questions. I don't know what the acronym TIDE stands for, TIDE, and it wasn't defined.
Mr. McClellan, Mr. Grable, do you want to take that? Either one?
Certainly, I'll give a shot, and then if Mr. Grable wants to add in, he's certainly welcome to. Mr. Kelly, TIDE is an acronym that we developed late last year. It's called Towards Inclusion,
Diversity, and Equity.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you. Secondly, there is, regarding the comments on the price schedule, there is that additional caveat that there's a 50,000 charge for all reports above 8. And I didn't get a sense as to whether or not that was reasonable and how many reports we have historically asked our current provider to do. You know, you asked them for 2 more reports, that's another 100,000. So can you comment on that piece for me?
I'm happy to, Mr. Kelly. Traditionally, or I should say historically, we've used in the neighborhood of 4, typically at the most, separate reports from a consultant. It was the evaluation committee's opinion that 8 was quite an ample number, and it was deemed unlikely that we'd need more.
Okay, thank you. And then lastly, I think it was a few years back, Mr. Keo and I were in China, and we met with the StepStone private equity team, and I thought they were fantastic. But this would be the second relationship with StepStone from a consulting perspective. Are we comfortable that, I mean, a 2 seems fine, but do we have some internal measures that we wouldn't go with the same consultant for all the business, for all the asset classes? Or can you comment a little bit on that, the concentration idea?
If you'll permit me, I'll defer to CIO Grable to answer that. I see he went off mute.
Yeah. Thanks, John. And Mr. Kelly, there are some plans smaller than LACERA that may have a single consultant. There are some that have multiple consultants like LACERA. I do not believe that 2 is, pardon the alliteration or whatever poor word choice, 2 is too many. We currently have Alborn for several different asset categories. And if that were an issue, it's something that we would raise with the board in the future.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Kelly. I have Mr. Bernstein.
Thank you, Chair Knox. Question for staff. Thank you for the report. But I understand why Stepstone is being evaluated as number one. I'm not clear why Cambridge, Alborn, and Makita were all not brought forward, even though I do understand why Stepstone is your preferred choice. I'd like some understanding of why three people who scored well and who frankly have better diversity representations didn't move forward to this stage. And I'd like to understand why Stepstone's diversity representations, and particularly their fairly shockingly low percentage of women on the board of directors and C-suite, didn't rise to the level of a concern in the presentation.
Thank you, Mr. Bernstein. Let me suggest first and foremost that the evaluation committee deems all four of the finalists as qualified to should your board so desire to hire them. However, we felt that since Stepstone was the highest ranking score in each of the categories listed on slide 14, that it was incumbent upon us to offer that recommendation, and so we have done so. It was certainly within the board's purview to consider additional candidates if you so desire. In terms of the diversity and inclusion, we would not. It was largely a subject matter that we reviewed, we considered. It was something where each of the candidates was deemed to either be acceptable or not, and they were deemed to be acceptable. Not to suggest for a moment that they were really good, and all of them leave room to be desired and have opportunity to improve. And as you point out, the representation of women on the board at Stepstone is an area that has opportunity for improvement.
Thank you, Mr. McClelland.
Yeah,
Mr. Oakham?
Yeah, I just want, I'm looking here at firm diversity and inclusion. Cambridge didn't disclose A, B, and C. Alborn did not disclose percentage of people of color in investment professionals. So I'm not sure why we're having this issue. We know Makita and we know Stepstone, and that was the decision. But it surprised me that Cambridge and Alborn did not disclose some issues that we would have looked for. So thank you for your hard work to the group.
I have a question.
Thank you. Mr. Kehoe?
So questions and then comment after I get the answers to the question. Mr. Grable, Mr. McClellan, did I hear correctly that the initial evaluation of the 5 or 7 applicants was conducted by only 2 people on a Zoom call with each with the interview process?
No, Mr. Kehoe, you did not hear correctly.
Okay.
The process included, there were 7 responses. All 7 were deemed to have met the minimum qualifications. Therefore, all 7 were individually evaluated by the 5 members of the evaluation team. The strongest 5 of those 7 were invited to a virtual interview, and the 5-member evaluation team plus Mr. Green and Mr. Grable, so a total of 7 people from LACERA participated on that round 1 virtual interview.
Okay, good. And then I don't recall this being offered out to the board for opportunity to participate. I know in the past we've done ad hoc groups that have assisted. Did I miss that?
Yes, Mr. Kehoe, at the time the RFP was recommended in September of last year, the recommendation included an invitation for participation by the board. And at that time, and Mr. Green can correct me if I'm wrong,
Yeah.
Mr. Green volunteered to represent the board in the interview process. To my knowledge, there were no other volunteers.
Okay, I don't, I guess I missed that when it went out originally. And then was there any feedback on why our current provider didn't apply? Townsend Group?
The direction, I would prefer in a public forum, if you don't mind, not to share too much about conversations I've had with representatives of Townsend, but I think that they, for their own internal reasons, elected not to respond. I don't want to speculate on why specifically they didn't respond. You know, as you're probably aware, they've been our real estate consultant, or the consultant to the board since I believe 1992. That's a long run. I think that they are probably cognizant of the idea that there appears to be interest in trying to refresh and update the approach to real estate, and for their own reasons opted not to respond.
Okay.
I'll just leave it at that.
Okay, thank you. And then the my only comments are that it would have been nice to have a interview process. I understand that it's a little bit different because we're over the Zoom rather than in person, and traditionally we normally have a couple come in and present and make a decision. I just find it a little bit different that we only have one being presented and that group is actually not even here presenting. That being said, I am aware of Stepstone, as Joe has indicated. I've met with them before. I think they're an excellent firm, and so I don't have any concerns about the firm itself. I just think the process would have been nice to had a little bit more board involvement.
Thank you, Mr. Kehoe. I have Mr. Green in the queue.
So I just wanted to thank John McClellan and the real estate team. We did a very, very deep dive into this conversation at the board level. We discussed the process, we discussed the team, we discussed the next steps. And I really appreciated being part of the process. We did ask for volunteers, there were none. I volunteered to be part of the group, including John Grable. The first round of interviews, and maybe Mr. McClellan could correct me if I'm wrong, it was 15, 20, 30, 40 hours that were done, a deep dive, including long, extensive conversations on diversity and equity and inclusion. It was probably about 75% of what we discussed on these calls, and included the full real estate team. There was the opportunity for other trustees to participate. And so I just want to thank the team for that. So I know it's a little easy to nitpick after the fact and throw stones, but I just want to thank the real estate team to getting us to this point, and just remind my colleagues that if they're not comfortable with the recommendations, they could vote them down. But I just want to thank the team because there's a lot of extensive heavy lifting that went on in the process. So thank you, John and team.
And just to be clear, asking questions and getting additional information is our role on this board, and is expected, and actually helps make sure that the process moves smoothly in the future.
Thank you. Thank you to the team. Are there any last questions? If there are not, I'd be happy to entertain a motion.
I'll move the item.
Mr. Kelly moves.
I'll second it.
Mr. Oakham seconds. Linda, please call the roll.
Thank you. Mr. Green?
Yes.
Mr. Santos?
Aye.
Mr. Kehoe?
Aye.
Ms. Greenwood?
Yes.
Mr. Oakham?
Aye.
Mr. Bernstein?
Aye.
Mr. Kelly?
Yes.
Ms. Sanchez?
Aye.
Chair Knox?
Aye.
Okay, motion passes unanimously.
Thank you all. Moving on to reports in section 10, there are several, some of which have presentations. We'll start with 10A, Envision 2021, the work plan and strategic initiatives. Mr. Grable.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I'll give Noah a second to pull up the slides. Thank you, Noah. Well, last year's work plan title was Vision 2020. And in retrospect, it was a terrible plan words. We were far from prescient. So this year, we have a much more humble title in Vision 2021. And can we turn to slide 3, please, Noah? Thank you. For us as a group, a work plan is an important document. It reiterates our commitments, it emphasizes our priorities, and it helps allocate resources, both critical Board of Investment time, as well as our collective human capital. Also, it's a measuring stick with respect to our progress. Several years ago, we used the allocator to investor graph on the right of the slide as a focal point of the work plan and our strategic initiatives. Some liked it, others maybe less so. Regardless, over the last couple of years, it served as a bit of a lingua franca for our initiatives. Next slide, please. Last year taught us to be adaptable and resilient, and it certainly is an understatement that 2020 was different. It did prove, however, that short-term tactical changes helped us collectively adhere to our long-term strategic objectives. First, we shifted to a remote environment. That certainly wasn't contemplated in our work plan. We made commitments to new relationships, and that tested our previously accepted process norms. Yet we remained 110% focused on LACERA's mission. On this slide, the winding path indicates progress. I believe we're better today than we were a year ago as we kept moving forward. Next slide, please. We changed our icons a bit last year. The top articulates our strategic objective, principally LACERA's mission, paying the promised benefits, and that's expressed through our strategic asset allocation. The middle of the graph shows 3 lenses through which we achieve our mission: produce through return enhancement, protect, risk reduction, and provide liquidity optimization. At the bottom, we include the Board of Investments initiatives: enhance operational effectiveness, optimize our investment model, maximize stewardship, strengthen influence on fees. This year, we disaggregated diversity, equity, and inclusion, which were part of the other initiatives. So we disaggregated it from the other categories to stand on its own. And the purpose of this is to give equal prominence to diversity, equity, and inclusion. Next slide, please. We had many accomplishments in 2020. Some are detailed on this slide. I'll name several. The first, operational effectiveness. We managed fund liquidity during a crisis without a forced rebalance. That's a tremendous accomplishment. We optimized our investment model. We conducted at least one structure review in each asset category. Some asset categories had multiple structure reviews. We maximized stewardship. We performed our initial carbon footprinting analysis, and we hope to use this in the upcoming strategic asset allocation exercise. With respect to fees and cost of capital, we put in place creative fee structures with hard as opposed to soft hurdles, and that will help us capture over 80% of gains as opposed to some of the manager asks were in the 60s and 70% of gains. As it relates to diversity, equity, and inclusion, for years we've been requesting EEO1 data. In 2020, we completed our initial assessment of our money manager partners. Slide 8, please. So going into Envision 2021, these near-term projects should look familiar. They're developed from Board of Investment actions, approved policies, prior meetings, and offsites. We'll go briefly around the fidget spinner because we can really spend all day going through this. As it relates to optimizing our investment model, we will look to make a concerted effort to incorporate new risk management tools. Last year, we had several RFPs that were approved by the board to onboard a significant amount of middle office capabilities. Maximizing stewardship, it is a priority for the Board of Investments for us to leverage our relationships such as CII, SASB, ILPA to amplify our voice. Influence on fees, we'll continue to build our co-investment programs and capabilities. As it relates to diversity, equity, inclusion, we will look to widen our sourcing channels. That's key. We think that inures to the benefit of the fund as a whole, not just within the emerging manager program that we will discuss in the next item. As for operational effectiveness, we'll look to strike the right balance between work from home and back to the office, because at some point this year, we're going to have to start transitioning back to the office, and we're working in a very productive manner right now, and we have to shift back, and that's going to have some issues potentially. Slide 9. These are some of the medium term, which we're defining in the footnote as more than 3 years, or that may be in the prior slide, pardon me. And aspirational items are in orange. Going forward, when I give this presentation next year, I hope to see things on this slide move to the prior one. I'll identify some salient initiatives that, even though they're medium term and aspirational, does not mean we're not working on them. As it relates to Tide, we will focus on private markets as structural challenges exist. As an LP, as a limited partner, we knowingly delegate certain rights that we hold in public markets. And it's something that we have to not engage, but we have to figure out the right way to do it in private markets. Another item under the Tide banner is to continue to build a talented, diverse, equitable, and inclusive internal team at LACERA. That is of critical importance. As it relates to operational effectiveness, and this may be, an evergreen project that Mr. Kelly, Mr. Oka may remember from their last time on the Board of Investments. We've been talking for a while about the OPEB trust and potentially investing in sleeves of the pension. That's something that we are working on. It's not without its challenges, which is why it hasn't come to the fore, but that's something that remains on our work plan. The investment model, I'll highlight one of the aspirational items, and this is something that was presented last month in the recommendation for stable for the hedge fund emerging manager program, is that we can hopefully begin and evaluate seeding firms where we help create firms. And that's something that truly is aspirational, and that's something that we can hopefully do. As it relates to stewardship, we hope to better articulate and communicate our thoughts. We've once again talked about this for a while, and we actually started doing it last year, but the work from home environment put a bit of a hamper on it, which is authoring white papers. That's something that we want to do to have a louder megaphone. And for influence on fees, we want to strike the right balance between access to the best firms and driving limited partner friendly terms. There is a structural tension, and that's something that we have to confront. Slide 10. This is a tentative calendar. We need to determine the type, forum, and timing for an offsite. We'll work with the Board of Investment leadership to do so at the right time in 2021. We'll also work with committee chairs on timing for committee meetings. We've penciled in 2 in this prospective calendar, and that's per policy for each committee. Slide 11. There are many icons on this page, maybe too many. For 2021, our hope is to build off the core elements of our investment program, which are detailed on the top of the slide. And maybe the slide is upside down, because the top is really the foundation. And that's our investment policy statement, our values, our strategic asset allocation, our strategic plan, and the identification of organizational culture. Those key elements shape and influence our work plan and strategic initiatives, which are represented in the graphic on the middle of the page. Our core elements on the top, plus our work plan and strategic initiatives in the middle, enhance our risk-adjusted returns for purposes of maximizing our mission to members, and that's represented on the bottom. Or maybe the easier way to interpret this slide is that the top part says that we've done a lot, the middle says that we've got a lot to do, and the bottom says that by adding structure that helps with the input and the output side of the ledger. The last slide I'll talk to is the appendix, which is the next 4 slides give a monthly view or preview of the calendar. And there are many projects that are already in process. And the year has barely started, but when we go through these slides, it shows that it's a full year already. And with that, Mr. Chair, I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Grable. I believe we have Mr. Bernstein in the queue first.
That is a legacy request. I'm okay with this. Thank you.
Copy. Thank you. Mr. Kelly.
Thank you, John, for that report. It did dawn on me when I was reviewing the Stepstone recommendation that there were individual bios for each of the consultant staff. And then when I got to your presentation here, all the staff was squished together in a little tiny picture, and there were no related bios. And I just thought it would be interesting if you had developed bios for each of the investment staff members to distribute those, because certainly I know some of them, but not all of them. And that would be interesting to me as a trustee. So thank you again for the report.
And just as a reminder, or this may not be a reminder, Mr. Kelly, the staffing and culture, the squished in picture on slide 11, that was a slide that we took out from an offsite slide that we gave in the summer of 2019, I believe, on staffing and culture, just to represent that that was a module that we have discussed with the board, but we will work on information for the board about who the investment team is, because I appreciate your comment.
Okay, unless there are any other questions or comments, moving on to 10B, strategic asset allocation, capital markets expectations, Mr. Perez.
Right. Good morning, Chair Knox and trustees. The next item on the agenda continues our monthly discussion on the strategic asset allocation study. As you know, over the last few months, it has been our goal to discuss the strategic asset allocation study every month as we go through this process. For this month, I am simply going to give a quick update on our plans involving the capital market expectations, as the process is a little different than what we did last time we went through this exercise in 2018. So in your packet, you do not have a presentation, but you should have a short memo describing the capital market expectation process, which I will refer to as CMEs. I want to highlight to the board that the CMEs play a very important role when it comes to modeling our strategic asset allocation, as the CMEs are the inputs that derive both the risk and return expectations for both the asset categories as well as the total fund. The final CMEs that will be used in our current asset allocation study will be brought before the board for a recommendation by Makita at the March meeting. And the process to arrive at the final CMEs is well underway, and it involves a little bit of a different approach, as I mentioned earlier. We are undertaking a larger analysis in the sense that in the current process, we will include working with Makita, using their CMEs as the guideline, and then working with the other asset class consultants such as Allborn, Stepstone, and Townsend to help derive a final set of CMEs, and with the asset class consultants providing their input in their specialized areas. I do want to note that the goal is for all parties to agree on a final set of CMEs. However, if there should be some disagreement, which I do not foresee happening, Makita will recommend which CME numbers will be presented to the board in March. As for the next steps in our asset allocation study, next month we will examine and discuss possible changes to asset category buckets. In March, Makita will review an asset liability study with the board, as well as the recommendation of the CMEs I mentioned earlier. And then in the months of April and May, and possibly June, we'll look at various asset allocations, benchmarks, and hopefully a recommendation to the board on the new strategic asset allocation in that same time frame. So Chair Knox, that concludes my update, and I'm happy to stand for any questions. I'm not sure if we lost Chair Knox. Trustee
Yeah.
Kelly? Trustee Kelly, I do see you're in the queue.
Sorry about that.
I do not have any questions or comments on this item.
Okay,
Thank you.
sorry about that.
Okay, are there any other questions? Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Moving on to item C, Emerging Manager Program Update. Mr. Wright, will you be kicking it off, or Vache, will you be handling?
Actually, Mr. Chairman, I'll kick it off.
Okay.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman and trustees. Can you hear me clearly?
Yes.
Yes.
All right, excellent. Then I'll begin. At the September 2020 board meeting, following a presentation by CIO Grable on LACERA's efforts to promote diversity, equity, and inclusion, trustees directed staff to return within 120 days with an overview of LACERA's emerging manager programs across the total fund. So Ted, Chris, and I are here to provide that update. Now, part of the board's directive was to include a presentation by JP Morgan on LACERA's private equity emerging manager program. And JP Morgan is scheduled to present right after us on today's agenda. Next page, please. Great. After a brief introduction that touches on the past, present, and expected future path of the emerging manager programs, we'll recap the individual programs in the various asset classes. After the individual program updates, we will review the allocations and returns. Then we'll conclude with some thoughts on the future expansion of the programs consistent with LACERA's broader TIDE initiative. Next page, please, Noah. LACERA's Emerging Manager Program was established in 1995. Back then, the fund was not nearly as well diversified as it is today, so the program consisted solely of U.S. equity managers. 5 years later, in 2000, the program was expanded to encompass global equities, fixed income, real estate, and private equity. Now, over the years, the various programs evolved. So starting in 2019, staff and Makita undertook a comprehensive 4-part review of LACERA's emerging manager policy, including its objectives, scope, and implementation practices. Those reviews culminated with an update of LACERA's emerging manager policy in February of last year. Now, looking to the future, the emerging manager programs are expected to expand. Just last month, the board selected a manager to oversee the hedge fund emerging manager program. And over the next year, we anticipate further expansion into illiquid credit and real assets. As the emerging manager programs expand, they'll be closely intertwined with LACERA's TIDE initiative, which has overlapping objectives but is broader in scope. As the returning trustees will recall, TIDE consists of 5 pillars that are founded on the proposition that diverse teams lead to better decisions and improved outcomes. Now, this concept applies equally to emerging managers, established managers, LACERA service providers, and to LACERA itself. Page 5, please, Noah. So let's turn to brief overviews of the various emerging manager programs. As I mentioned, the public equity program was the first. Initially, it operated as a fund-to-funds program overseen by Northern Trust and FIS, but in 2017, it was shifted to an internally managed direct program and expanded to include non-US mandates. Looking ahead, we plan to increase the emphasis on graduating managers, and as you saw earlier today during the work plan presentation, one of staff's near-term projects is to more fully develop our operational due diligence on managers. Now, ODD is especially important with emerging managers since smaller, less established firms have limited resources and may be more prone to risks such as cybersecurity, business continuity, and succession planning. Now, at this point, perhaps if you'll allow me, I'd like to digress to acknowledge Mr. Moore's comments in public comment. Noah, would you go to the end of this presentation to attachment B, which contains the emerging manager policy that the board approved in February of last year? So if you could go to, yes, to the purpose, yes, purpose and objective. I think it clarifies that we're not being pejorative when we say that there may be higher risks attendant with emerging managers. In fact, if you'll see in that first paragraph, it talks about balancing the higher expected return with the higher expected risk. And I think we actually take a very balanced, pragmatic, and dispassionate approach, or the board did, in approving this policy, because the next paragraph talks about the higher expected returns, but the third paragraph talks about counterbalancing the attractive returns with the potential for higher risks. And those risks that I mentioned about business continuity and succession planning. And we actually have experience with this firsthand, because I recall in 2016, one of our fixed income emerging managers, GW Capital, decided to dissolve the business following the retirement of the founder. So again, it's not intended to be pejorative. It's really intended to be pragmatic and balanced. So forgive me for that digression, but if Noah, if we can go back to page 6, and I can talk about the fixed income program. Thank you. Now, the fixed income program was established in 2001 with the hiring of 4 managers. Over the years, a total of 7 managers have participated in the program, and 4 have graduated, including Pew Capital, which currently manages a core mandate. There are currently no fixed income emerging managers remaining in the program, though that's not due to lack of effort. In 2019, LACERA conducted a search for an emerging manager in core and core plus mandates, but the search was terminated due to limited manager response and lack of strategy fit in the few proposed products. Similarly, last year, as part of the high yield RFP, we intentionally lowered the minimum qualifications for AUM and length of track record to encourage response from emerging managers, but none responded. Therefore, looking ahead, we plan to focus our efforts on finding an emerging manager in the illiquid credit category. Not only do we anticipate greater interest by emerging managers within the illiquid credit space, but we also believe that the risk-seeking profile of illiquid credit is better suited to an emerging manager program. Now, to elaborate on that point, let's turn to the next page, page 7. Now, as you recall, at the 2018 strategic asset allocation, we separated the fixed income portfolio into 2 functional categories: risk reduction and mitigation, which, as the name indicates, focuses on reducing risk, and credit, which targets moderate return and risk and derives part of its risk from a fairly high correlation, approximately 0.7, to the growth category. The higher risk profile of illiquid credit is more compatible with the investment and operational risks associated with emerging managers and is better aligned with the objectives of LACERA's emerging manager policy, which is to enhance the total fund's risk-adjusted return. Next page, please, Noah. The real estate emerging manager program has evolved over the past 20 years, initially implemented via fund of funds and later via a direct program. One manager, CityView, remains in the program. Earlier today, the board approved a recommendation to hire a new real estate consultant, Stepstone. And of course, staff will work closely with Stepstone on potential program structures and strategies, and any proposed modifications to the real estate emerging manager program will be proposed at the structure review scheduled for the second half of this year. With that, I'll turn it over to Chris, who will provide an overview of the private equity emerging manager program.
Thank you, Vachi, and good morning, trustees. Similar to the fixed income program, the private equity program kicked off in 2001, and the program was managed internally. In 2008, the board opted to have the program managed externally, and JP Morgan was selected to manage on a discretionary basis the first, what has turned out to be 4 separate tranches of investment capital. Over the years, we've had 6 managers graduate from the core program, or to the core program, 2 from the portfolio managed by LACERA, and 4 since JP Morgan came on board. We expect JP Morgan to fully commit their current mandate by the end of this year, which means the staff will be putting together an RFP very soon for the next edition of the private equity emerging manager program. Slide 10, please, Noah. The hedge fund program, which is part of the risk mitigation functional category, was recently approved for investment at the December Board of Investments meeting. The trustees selected London-based Stable Asset Management to be the separate account discretionary manager with a program structure similar to the one LACERA has used with JP Morgan in private equity. The trustees allocated $250 million to the manager to build out the program over the next 12 to 24 months. And I know we're all looking forward to that. Next slide, please. Here we highlight a welcome change to the emerging manager policy the trustees made last February and how it benefited the hedge fund manager search. Whereas in the past, minimum qualifications for managers were somewhat prescriptive, MQs now, as stated in the top half of the chart, will be tailored to the specific search and will take into account the manager universe available at the time the search is approved. To give Stable Asset the best chance at success in identifying managers, the trustees approved bespoke manager qualifications as outlined on the bottom half of the chart. Next slide, please. The program in the credit functional category has yet to get underway. However, the team will soon begin evaluating the optimal program implementation strategy, where they will look at opportunities in the illiquid credit space, with the goal of bringing ideas forward to the board at the 2021 credit structure review later this year. The launch of the program is estimated to happen sometime in 2022. Next slide, please. The last program we'll cover is real assets. As a relatively new asset category and gaining investment momentum, real assets is viewed as inefficient with opportunities for emerging managers now. As such, emerging managers will be considered for future private mandates as the team transitions the asset category's public exposure to private. With that said, the real assets team is also currently planning a separate emerging manager program with a well-defined construct, with the goal of bringing forward to trustees a plan to consider at the real asset structure review near the end of this year. Now I'll turn it over to Ted, who'll take you through allocations, returns, and the conclusion. Ted?
Thanks, Chris. Good morning, Chairman Knox and other trustees. Thank you, Noah. Let's talk a little bit about allocation ranges and market values. On this slide, of course, you can see that our actual investments total just over $1 billion for our emerging manager programs. And the ranges are 0 to approximately 8.5%, and that all of the various asset classes are within policy range. Next slide, please. From a return perspective, what you will immediately notice is that less efficient and less liquid asset classes appear to be a more effective way of investing in emerging managers. For example, our private equity program, which Chris talked about earlier, and also the fact that we are embarking on a new program in illiquid credit, where Vache talked about the virtues of why that may work for emerging managers. The corollary of this is that efficient asset classes have had a much more challenging history investing as an emerging manager program. For example, our domestic US Global Equity Program, as well as the domestic US industry programs, have had a very, very difficult time producing alpha versus their benchmarks. And this can be due to not only the fact that those asset classes, equities that is, are very, very efficient, but also there exists economies of scale in larger firms, which can lead ultimately to better pricing and effectively to more alpha capture opportunities. Next slide. In conclusion, a number of things I want to highlight. Vache noted earlier that LACERA was an early adopter in emerging managers from the 1990s. We've talked about TIDE and how we are embracing TIDE's capital formation pillar, which we feel should broaden the reach of our emerging manager programs and potentially boost our risk-adjusted returns. Furthermore, our focus on manager graduation through IDD or investment due diligence and ODD, operational due diligence, should go a long way to improving our program. But ultimately, we expect more customized programs per asset class with the upcoming initiatives geared to elevate our programs. And we list a few of them there. With that, I will gladly pause and we will delightfully take questions or concerns from the board.
Thank you, Mr. Wright. I have a question for Mr. Santos.
Okay.
Thank you. Good morning. So it appears to me, and correct me if I'm wrong, but when we have implemented the program, the emerging manager program in-house, typically in public equities, we had two fund of funds, and since we decided to do that in-house, it appears to me that we haven't been as successful as before. I could be totally incorrect. If I'm right, is it because we don't have the ability to source this is small and emerging managers, or I don't know, it appears to me that we're not that successful. The same thing with the real estate. With real estate, we only hit down to one manager, if I understand the presentation correctly. At one point, we had a lot more than that. So it seems to me that aside from the private equity that we use in fund of funds, we are doing better in terms of one, the performance, and two, the ability to find those key managers that we can bring into the program.
Great question, Mr. Santos. It's sort of a two-part response for global equities. As you know, when we outsourced it to the fund of funds, they were primarily invested in large cap managers. So, and when we've implemented our in-house program, that's been primarily in small cap managers. In the sense we've implemented our in-house, small caps have had the worst historical performance versus large cap in the New York Stock Exchange history. So it's sort of like comparing apples to oranges. Within the small cap universe, I know Makita had done some peer analysis, and based on them, the manager's styles, they're actually doing fine versus their peer group. But that being said, our purpose of our emerging manager programs is to be value added, regardless of whether they're small, mid, or large. And in both instances, prior to when we had fund of funds as well as in-house, the same dynamic seems to have shown up on the US side in particular. It's just very difficult for managers to beat benchmarks. And we saw that with the, I guess that's like 4 years ago when Makito did a presentation on that. It was a large cap, mid cap challenge, and that has essentially crept into small cap US. So that's where I think it's less of a being able to source and more about where the efficiencies are. I think you're on mute.
If I may, Mr. Knox, so do you believe that we can still be successful with regards to this particular program in-house, or at some point would you be recommended to the board that we reevaluate the process and perhaps go to a fund of funds? And also, I would like to hear about the real estate portfolio and vis-a-vis. I mean, I understand in the presentation that we're waiting for StepStone, but it's kind of surprising that we have to wait for a new consultant since we've been operating for years.
But I guess John McClellan would be the best person to respond to the real estate, but before he does, and to give him some time to prepare, as far as your question, we certainly believe in emerging managers as a whole, and we want to get the best returns for our members. It is very challenging on the US side. We do have the non-US has had a slightly different experience, and we certainly will devote our efforts to finding the best risk-adjusted opportunities. Going back to fund of funds is probably not the way to go, because we've had that experience before. And what we've noticed and found in the business is that even on a fund of funds perspective, many of them, including ones that we invested, have essentially abandoned their domestic US programs and have specifically emphasized the non-US programs as well. So, even there, they've noticed and been affected by those trends. I think John Grable had an addition to that before I hand it over.
Mr. Festino had offered to elaborate on the question, and Mr. Grable as well had a comment. John, did you have a preference?
A couple thoughts. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thanks, Ted. A couple thoughts, and I'm curious as to what Leo's thoughts are. Back in 2017, the board made the decision to terminate the fund of funds because they were underperforming. My recollection at the time was that they that they may have underperformed the prior decade by close to 2%, as indicated on the slide 16. So one of the things with a fund of funds implementation versus an in-house implementation of global equities is a fund of funds will approach a more index-like structure because they'll have more managers, such that it's the fee drag that hurts a lot. In-house, that type of program may have a greater dispersion of outcomes because it will be a more concentrated portfolio. So that's something that we can discuss with the equity committee in terms of the style of the program, but both instances did underperform. As it relates to real estate, the underperformance of that portfolio is a function of a concentrated portfolio once again, where we used our style of implementation of LACERA holding title such that we had fewer assets, and those fewer assets had the potential to have a greater dispersion of outcome, either over or underperformance. And unfortunately, in this case, it was an underperformance by virtue of having that concentrated portfolio. So one of the things that we may want to contemplate for real estate is the private equity style, the hedge fund style, separately managed account that may invest in more funds such that we have greater diversification, because it is a less efficient asset category where there is a greater potential for alpha than there is in global equities.
Mr. Festina, was there something you were going to add above and beyond that?
Yes, thank you. And very briefly, just to highlight that the global equity composite is only a handful of years, about 2 and change perhaps. And that is a very small amount of time to judge performance. In addition, the process, at least as stated at the time, was that was the first of additional searches that would take place to eventually round up a cohort of emerging manager strategies. So I don't see that as the whole composite. And thirdly, the qualifications put in place at the time, which have since been changed, ended up favoring a cohort of strategies that had, by and large, a value tilt. And that reversed, and over the last 2 years, it pretty much has not been in place. Over a full cycle, the expectation of value versus growth is not that material, but over short time periods, those differences can add up. In summary, I would think that both staff and Mikita agree that there is the expectation that the program over a full cycle will produce excess returns with reasonable risk levels.
Great, thank you for that. I think that's really important to look at the full market cycle. You know, I've always been in favor of moving as much of the operation or investments operation in-house, but the bottom line is I want for us to be successful not only in returns but also having a good program with different managers that we can then graduate. So again, I just want to emphasize that I want what's the best for LACERA and ask my questions, but I do understand that we need to look at a market cycle. Appreciate that.
Thank you, Mr. Santos. Mr. Kelly?
Thank you. Ted, I do empathize with Mr. Moore's comments, because the fact is, as you say on page 1 of your presentation, counterbalancing the attractive returns is a greater investment operational risk, particularly in areas of compliance portfolio administration. But that's not always the case. I mean, if you were to just do a simple Google search on SEC sanctions and fines, you probably, the great majority of those in the last calendar year would be against established, well-capitalized firms. So my question is there, do we monitor the firms from the perspective of these increased risks, compliance portfolio administration, and in fact, have those risks materialized? And if we find in monitoring that the compliance administration or other things are not sufficient, do we provide resources to allow the firms to improve in those areas?
I guess I could jump in. You know, and from a global equities, I guess this is pervasive throughout the department. We talk about IDD and ODD. We do all of those things. So it is on an ODD operational perspective, it is more challenging for smaller, newer firms because the resources are a lot more limited. But if we monitor them ad nauseum and a lot more, I would say, relative to more established, in that given that the resources are so much more limited, any subtle change in process, in people, can result in us becoming a lot more alarmed and potentially terminating. Case in point, last month, we terminated a manager who had a key person leave. In larger firms, there are a number of key individuals, so the threshold for terminating based on something like that would be very different. So we do monitor those things. You know, we will highlight when asset size, for example, dwindles to a point where we've calculated what the run rate or the rate for a firm to continue as a going concern is. the threshold for that is obviously a lot more challenging as well. So we'll keep numbers and update that based on staffing, salaries, financials, and the like. So I think your point is very, very well taken, and one that we always have to stay on top of emerging managers to even a greater level because of the size constraint and the potential issues that may come out of it.
Thank you, Mr. Wright. Seeing no other questions in the queue, that would close this item out. At this point, I would propose a 10-minute break since we've been going almost for a couple of hours. So we'll see you back at 10:55. Just making sure everyone saw Bonnie's note. If you could please turn on your camera so we can ensure we have a quorum before we begin. I see Mr. Oakham, Mr. Grable, welcome, you don't count. Ms. Sanchez, our expert kayaker, she does count. Mr. Bernstein. I won't forget next time.
I'll tell you every joke there is.
Let's see. I saw Mr. Bernstein briefly.
I'm here.
Okay,
Ms.
thank you.
Greenwood,
We
yeah,
are-
they're all here.
We're ready to begin. I did want to point out we received one additional written public comment that Linda shared with all of us, and you can find that in your email. Next is under reports, item D, Private Equity Emerging Manager Program. Mr. Chang, did you want to kick things off?
Yes. Good morning, Mr. Chair and trustees. Enhancing diversity, equity, and inclusion has been a long-standing priority for LACERA. And as Vache and Ted mentioned earlier, our efforts date back to 1995 with our Emerging Manager Program, and as well as involvement in various advocacy groups. Benefits of DE&I in the investment process and partner evaluations include better financial performance, diversity of thought, healthier work environment, and mitigation of risk. DEI is established in LACERA's investment policy statement, incorporated in our corporate governance principles, and extended to LACERA's emerging manager policy. While building upon LACERA's initiatives and expanding our industry influence, trustees also motioned for engagement with our private equity manager program partner, JP Morgan, to help form a baseline. Today's speakers, Ushmi Mahorta and Lorraine Costa from JP Morgan, will share their experiences and approach to DEI, as well as LACERA's emerging manager program performance. We'll love this to be an interactive dialogue and an open forum to exchange ideas. So please feel free to provide comments and questions during the presentation. And now passing over to Ushmi and Lorraine.
Great. Great, thanks, Calvin. Good morning, and thank you, Chairman Knox and Board of Trustees, for the opportunity to present to you today. We hope you and your families are staying safe and healthy during this uncertain and challenging time. We are very grateful for LACERA's leadership and partnership in implementing the Emerging Manager Program since it began in 2009. My name is Ushmi Mehrotra, and I've been a portfolio manager with our private equity group for the past 18 years. I will now pass it to my colleague, Lorraine Costa, to introduce herself.
Good morning, Board of Trustees. I'm Lorraine Costa, and I'm one of the co-founders of our group. I've been investing in private equity for the past 25 years. Together with Ushmi, we have been managing the LACERA Emerging Manager Program since our partnership's inception in 2009. And we aim to be a special partner with LACERA to implement your TIDE initiative. Ushmi?
Identifying and investing with emerging managers is a core part of our investment philosophy since our group's inception way back when in 1980. As mentioned, LACERA was an early leader and continues to be a leader in this market and highly visible in terms of your commitment and contribution to the emerging and diverse manager marketplace. We are pleased to report that performance of the Emerging Manager Program has been solid, above the private equity benchmark, with strong liquidity, and we have strong diversity metrics across the portfolio, which we will discuss in more detail.
Next slide, please. We will start with an update on the diversity, equity, and inclusion attributes to the Emerging Manager Program. We will discuss performance inception to date, as well as our relationship with the LACERA staff to enable more graduates and share information. We will then transition to a bit about our group, which we call PEG, and include our efforts to include increasing sourcing and investing with managers who are underrepresented. Next slide, please.
On this slide, we provide an update on our team. We have 55 professionals solely dedicated to private equity investments across partnerships, secondary, and co-investments over decades, and we have seen multiple cycles. The average tenure across the senior portfolio managers of our team is 19 years in private equity and 15 years average tenure across our entire portfolio management team, which speaks to the multi-generational nature of our team. We believe, importantly, commitment to diversity starts in-house with our own team. 58% of our team members are represented by women and or people of color. 53% of our most senior team members, those that are at the executive director or managing director level, are represented by women and or people of color. Note that this is not a new focus for us. Our group has always held the notion that people from diverse backgrounds and skill sets are additive to our overall culture and additive to our results. We are aligned with our clients and personally invest a portion of our compensation into every investment we make on your behalf via an employee co-investment program. On the bottom half of the page, you can see there our dedicated LACERA account team. Laureen, Brian McCann, and I have been working with the account since the beginning of this mandate, 2009. Dana Haymoff co-leads our European office and has been more involved with LACERA staff over the past several years as we have looked to expand the Emerging Manager Program focus outside the US. Joe Knight is a newer member of our team and has also been actively involved with LACERA over the past 2 years.
Next slide, please. Investing with diverse managers is important across our whole platform. Since inception, our group has invested over $13 billion with diverse managers. Specific to LACERA, we have created a high-performing portfolio of emerging and diverse managers. Of the US managers, 98% of the commitments are to diverse teams, and 67% of the commitments are to teams with diverse senior investment professionals at the partner or principal level. To drill down deeper, 40% of the commitments are to Black or Brown managers. That is 24% to Black or African American partners or principals, 16% to Hispanic or Latino partners or principals, 32% to women partners or principals, and 32% to managers with Asian investment professionals at the partner or principal level. Next slide, please.
This slide is a reminder of what the LACERA Emerging Manager Program is and an update on our portfolio results. LACERA was early to recognize this as a key area of focus and a growing and potentially successful market. Emerging managers within LACERA's program are defined as first, second, or third institutional funds raised by a manager with certain fund size caps. The mandate has evolved from EM1 in 2009 to EM4, which is the current tranche that we're investing, to include non-US general partners, as well as co-investments alongside emerging managers. Each year, we see on average over 200 new emerging managers, and we invest in less than 10% of those. We are looking to identify the highest quality top tier firms of tomorrow. It's important to note that just because we say no today does not mean we're going to say no during the next fundraise. Oftentimes, we're cultivating and advising these partners and relationships over multiple years before we make the first investment. And there's a lot of time and resources spent across our entire team to build these relationships. On the right-hand side of the page there, you see the program's performance relative to LACERA's private equity benchmark. It's important to note we have the same investment philosophy as LACERA in that emerging managers are held to the same high performance standards that apply across our entire portfolio. In fact, as we have seen in our data, oftentimes emerging managers outperform established managers because they're starting newer, smaller firms and have more to prove in order to stay in business. So on the right, you see the performance as of 9/30 on a net basis is 21% IRR and a 1.7x. This is 1,100 basis points above the benchmark. Note that this performance does include EM3 and 4, which are still very early in their life in terms of private equity investments. Additionally, I'd highlight that liquidity has been strong across the portfolio with 1x DPI distributions received versus paid in capital as of year-end 2020. And distribution activity in particular in 2020 was almost 100 million, driven by several investments, including one co-investment we made in 2014, which was fully realized at the end of the year at 17 times return. And please, next slide, Noah, thank you. On this slide, we show what has driven the performance. So as you can see, it is pretty broad-based. I know there's a lot of small dots on the slide, but it does show that the return so far has been pretty strong, pretty broad-based with strong performers across buyout investments, venture capital, and co-investments. I would caveat it's still very early in the EM3 and 4 portfolios, which started in vintage year 2016. So there's still a lot more maturity here in the portfolio. Next slide, please. This slide is now a further deeper dive into the performance metrics across the portfolio. Again, this shows performance is pretty broad-based across categories. A few numbers I'd highlight, you see the partnership investment performance at the top. That is the vast majority of the portfolio, which is the mandate. It's at a 19% IRR and a 1.7x. Next slide, please. This slide shows the performance quartile results of just those partnership investments. You'll note that 57% of the partnership investments are in the top 2 quartiles in terms of the performance benchmark in their respective vintage years. Next slide, please. This slide, we'd like to highlight a couple of representative investments that have significant minority ownership. First, NMS on the left side, that is a firm focused on lower middle market healthcare and business services investments. And the firm is managed by Martine Chavez and Kevin Jordan, and the majority of their team is represented by people of color. On the right-hand side, Great Point Partners, that is a middle market buyout firm focused exclusively on healthcare. The firm has 5 partners, 2 of which are represented by people of color. These 2 managers and several other managers within the entire program represent potential graduation candidates for LACERA's core private equity program.
Next slide, please. And before I start speaking to this slide, I saw in the comments, Mr. Kelly, that you may have had a question. Would you like to ask it now or wait until the end of the presentation?
I can ask now comments. First of all, I've been a very strong advocate for gender diversity in financial services firms that do business with LACERA. And so it's great to see 2 women presenting. Thank you for that. But my comment is when you talk about the teams, you generally cut the teams in terms of 2 perspectives, race and gender. But today, actually, I think is probably a historic moment for this board when it elected 2 of its openly gay members as officers. So I don't see an LGBTQ kind of prism on this, and I wonder why.
Thank you for your comments and for your question, Mr. Kelly. We agree that there are other avenues of diversity that we should be considering, and we are doing our best to expand how we are measuring and the data that we are collecting. So to date, we did actually recently adopt a new database for logging all of the new opportunities that we're seeing. And we did add an LGBTQ selection. One of the points, though, is that the general partners have to be forthright with telling us that they would like to be considered as an LGBTQ group. And so we are absolutely trying to be more inclusive and get capital to more of the underrepresented groups, but it's just harder to measure at this point in time.
I agree. I also think, though, it is important to consider that because the fact is that if the firm is welcoming to LGBT persons, then that would make sense that an LGBT person would self-identify as such. But I just want to make sure it was on your radar screen. It's something we can look forward to seeing in the future.
Yes.
So thank you for that.
Yes, it is. Thank you, Mr. Kelly. So on this slide here on knowledge transfer, together with the LACERA staff, we instituted more formal processes to enhance communication and knowledge transfer. For example, we send information about new emerging manager investment opportunities every month, and we have monthly calls to discuss the managers that we are in deep due diligence with. We aim to be a strategic partner with you, and work with you on other parts of your private equity portfolio as well. For example, we did a special project with 5 members of the LACERA staff that took place over 2 days. It was regarding our approach to investing in secondaries. In addition to 10 PEG team members who discussed examples and walked through our models, we brought in external legal counsel as part of the program. Specific to facilitating graduation, during our monthly calls with LACERA, we also discussed the existing managers already in the portfolio to help the LACERA staff get to know those managers earlier in the graduation process. We make introductions so that the LACERA staff can start establishing their own relationships and make the graduation transition more seamless. And a special shout out to Calvin Chang. He deserves an award for waking up at 5:30 in the morning to join our team's global investment meeting discussions regarding emerging managers. Next slide, please. Moving into some of our efforts regarding diversity, equity, and inclusion for the Emerging Manager Program now. Next slide, please. And again, one more slide. Thank you. Starting with sourcing. During 2020, we increased our efforts to source African American or Black and Hispanic or Latino private equity managers. We started with a list of 75 managers and during the year doubled it to 150 managers through research and networking. During our outreach conversation with an endowment that was also trying to invest more in underrepresented managers, we were introduced to the Recast Enablement Program. Recast is a new firm that is trying to help get new venture funds off the ground. We participated in 2 of their sessions, one on marketing and fundraising, and their demo day or pitch day. We also had office hours with diverse first-time funds, and those sessions were probably the most rewarding for me personally because I got to listen to and coach some amazing up-and-comers. And while most of them are not ready for us yet, I believe some strong candidates will emerge. Next slide, please. Staying on the sourcing topic, another important component of sourcing is being visible in the communities. And I know some of you have attended educational events like the Southern California chapter of NASP holding their Private Equity Education Day. And while many firms give lip service to supporting organizations like NASP or TWIGO, we can point to several managers that we have invested with after meeting them at these events. And our support runs deep. For example, our colleague Dana Hamoff is one of the co-founders of Level 20, which is an organization started in Europe to increase the number of women participating in private equity. Next slide, please. We made progress improving our procedures too. We added additional diversity metrics to our offerings database. We added fields to our operational due diligence questionnaire to include more on DEI. We are helping LACERA to obtain your new DEI questionnaire from the managers. And we received an A rating from the UNPRI and are in the process of becoming a signatory to the new Institutional Limited Partners Association Diversity in Action Initiative. Next slide, please. We are committed to the marketplace and the managers themselves. For example, we made introductions of potential investment partners, accounting professionals, and limited partners who invested in their new funds. We're helping non-diverse firms as well. We're helping them to become aware and get involved generally, but also helping them to find diverse investment professionals. And as you would expect, we have a high bar, which has resulted in the strong performance. But that means we have to say no to over 90% of the investment opportunities we see. So we still try to be helpful so that those managers can institutionalize and be ready for investment from us for the next go around. Next slide.
So where do we go from here? We want to continue to ramp our efforts on DEI, including better tracking of data across the portfolio, including widening the lens to be more inclusive, to Mr. Kelly's earlier question. We also want to continue to be proactive and talk to managers about LACERA's philosophy on diversity and inclusion. We have and will continue to introduce managers to diverse candidates in their networks, in our networks, as they look to grow their teams. And we are proud of the diversity profile of our own team. And as I said way back on the first slide, we will continue to add diversity to our team as we grow. And we want to recognize that we will continue to enhance and improve the collaboration that we have with LACERA. We are very committed to our long-term partnership with you, and we are very grateful for your leadership and support over the past 12 years. With that, thank you very much for the opportunity, and we'd be happy to take any questions at this time.
Thank you very much for the presentation. Do I have any questions or comments from trustees at this point?
Yes, Mr. Knox.
Sure, Mr. Santos.
Good morning, ladies. Thank you very much for your presentation. Great job. I'd love to see that performance, the 21% performance. My question is more to the non-US firms. I know the last allocation, it included your ability to invest globally. So I know it's relatively new, the program, so but I would appreciate if a few comments with regards to how we're doing in terms of the non-US and specifically with the emerging markets. I see you invest obviously US, Europe, and Asia. I don't see Africa or Latin America. And there's a lot of countries in Asia that, from my perspective, they already developed, right? Because they're doing really, really well. So, so I appreciate the comments on that. And that's it for now.
Great, thank you, Mr. Santos, for your question. We continue to be actively looking in all parts of the private equity market on a global basis. We are active looking in some of the newer, more emerging markets, to your point, Africa, Latin America, et cetera. But we have not to date done any investments in the portfolio in those markets, not to say that we won't. We are very focused on, you know, the overall risk that we're taking on with some of these firms, especially now during the pandemic, and how some of these markets have been more affected or less affected during this time. That being said, we're very open to continue looking in those markets and have seen a lot of new firms, especially in the Latin American market versus kind of the African market, which is still early in its development, in my opinion. On the Asian market side, to your point, we have made some investments in the portfolio in China in particular, and are actively looking across Asia for other emerging manager opportunities.
Good. Thank you for that.
Thank you, Mr. Santos. Mr. Bernstein?
Thank you, Chair Knox. Putting myself on camera. Thank you for the presentation. I got knocked off, and you made reference to Mr. Kelly's comment. I may be repeating him, but I just really want to push politely on the explicit inclusion of queer and trans people of color. I don't think good intentions are enough, and I've been here and doing this long enough that I'm getting a little bit tired of sort of a catch-all of expanded categories that never quite gets defined. And respectfully to my colleagues, if we're going to be talking about this and people who aren't LGBTQ don't speak up in favor of it, at a certain point, please know that failing to acknowledge that it's your priority means that it's not your priority. So what people do, obviously, with their own voices is their decision, but as a gay man, I'm getting tired of being the gay guy asking about this. And secondly, for staff, I have a request. This is the second time today that we're being presented with the TIDE initiative. We as a board have not ratified it. It is a very worthy initiative. A lot of good work has gone into it. I am requesting that it come to us on our next BOI agenda so that we can ratify it, because currently, as I understand it procedurally, it's a staff initiative and not formally approved by the board. And to me, that hampers its effectiveness. And I think it's terrific, but we have to ratify it.
Thank you, Mr. Bernstein. Seeing no one else in the queue, are there any last questions or comments? No, thank you very much for the presentation. We appreciate your time. Now we have several information-only items, items E through L. Are there any trustees that had either a question or a comment on any of those? Hearing none, seeing none, we will move on to items for staff review. Item 11, Linda?
Mr. Knox, the only item I have was presented by Mr. Bernstein just now is for staff to return the TIDE initiative to allow the board to ratify for future meetings.
Okay, thank you. Good of the order. Linda, do you want to go around?
Sure, I will.
I'm sorry, Mr. Knox.
Oh,
Apologize.
go ahead, Mr. Santos.
Really quick on the travel report.
Which report? I'm sorry.
On the travel report.
Got it.
I will respectfully request that that report be corrected because he has been listed as attending a conference that I did not. So this is like my second request. So I really appreciate Mr. Kleiman, if you make sure that our report is more accurate than what it is today. Thank you.
We will make that adjustment.
The adjustment, Mr. Santos, adjustment has been made, but the travel memo was printed before the adjustment was made. So it's already been moved over and it has been removed from your from the travel report.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good of the order.
Mr. Green?
I don't have anything. Thank you.
Mr. Santos?
Nothing. Thank you.
Mr. Kehoe?
Nothing. Just congratulations to the new officers.
Okay, Miss Greenwood?
Nothing, just congratulations to the new officers. It's a heck of a job you have assumed. Let us know if you need help.
Mr. Oakham?
Yeah, I would also like to congratulate all the new electees and appointees to their jobs. But I also, this first meeting back, gone a year, and I was very impressed with the presentations. I think everybody, gave us insight into what's going to happen. Obviously, we're at 66 billion. That's just exciting, and what's happened, with the returns this year, and particularly this year after 220. So thank you for the updates, and I'm looking forward to the year.
Thank you. Mr. Bernstein? You're on mute.
Happy New Year, everyone, and congratulations to everyone who was elected and appointed today. I agree with Mr. Grable's cautions about what may be coming, but 2020 rather astonishingly turned out to be a remarkable year. So I want and hope that everyone takes a moment before we begin to worry about what's coming next to feel good about that. And I want to thank staff for all of their excellent and ongoing work. Last week during our BOR meeting, we had an insurrection. Today we have an impeachment. I think my hope is that the remainder of the year become increasingly dull. So that is all from me.
Thank you. Mr. Kelly?
Thank you. Thank you, colleagues, for your support. When I was looking over the membership of these officers for the last dozen years or so, it hit me that the member elected by retirees had never been represented as chair or vice chair. So I'm here today as the elected member of retirees, and I thank you for that support. I also wanted to acknowledge the staff reports. I thought they were very well done. And finally, I just wanted us to not forget that there are many of our members out there who are continuing to fight COVID, particularly frontline healthcare workers, and they're on the edge. And I think everything that we all can do to collectively lower the surge gives them the ability to exhale. And I don't want to forget them. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Ms. Sanchez?
Yes, so thank you and congratulations to our new leadership. And I think as normally happens with leadership turnover, there's always sort of that expectation of what's going to happen. And I made this comment, I make this comment regularly, but I think it's important. One of the things that I appreciate about one of Mr. Bernstein's comments is that we all need to have each other's back. And I think, this year, what I am hoping is that we continue to strive to make efforts to work together in order to create a more cohesive and shared understanding about what our role is, and what we're trying to accomplish. And my view is that we always feel that we individually are trying to do what is best. And I have always believed that. But sometimes, you know, when we don't talk enough or we don't work together enough, we don't establish sort of that shared agreement on kind of what we're doing. And you know, that diversity is excellent, and it's one of the things that I think is one of our core mandates. And so I'm not saying that we should not have a diversity of thought, but I do hope that we can agree to be collaborative even when we don't agree. And I hope that this year will be a banner year for that. And I look forward to working with all of you again for 3 more years.
Thank you. And Mr. Knox.
Thank you. Appreciate the warm wishes. Congratulations to the new officers. I think Ms. Sanchez hit the nail on the head. I think collaboration and communication are going to be the key, working with each other, even when we disagree. Thank you to staff for all their efforts going into today. Linda sent out an email asking for interest in the various committees. I would note that JOG C is now filled, but we certainly have the other committees, and I appreciate your interest in those. And then I liked what our prior chair, Mr. Green, did every month with the unsung hero. So I'll be, you know, speaking with Mr. Grable about ensuring that we continue with that. For this month, I would accept JP Morgan's nomination of Mr. Chang for waking up at 5 a.m. So you're our unsung hero this month. With that, I think we still need to go to a couple other people, right, Linda?
No, that's it. You're the last.
Okay.
Oh, Mr.
Kryman
Santos,
or Mr.
Kryman,
Grable?
Steve, and Grable. Yeah.
Yeah.
Mr. Knox, can I make
Sure.
one
Mr. Santos?
quick comment? When I got elected to LACERA Board of Investments, the chair was the retiree. Her name was Sandy, African American. She was an attorney. She was the chair for many years until she was replaced by somebody else.
Excellent. Thank you for that.
Mr. Kryman?
Yes, I just wanted to congratulate all the officers and Chair Knox. Look forward to working with you. That's really all I wanted to say, and I'm really looking forward to an uneventful year, quite frankly. So thank you very much.
Mr. Grable?
I have a very exciting announcement. PREA, which stands for the Pension Real Estate Association, has named, as of yesterday, our own Cindy Rivera as a John W. Corza Leadership Fellow for 2021. Congratulations, Cindy.
Very cool. Congratulations.
Mr. Rice?
Congratulations to Chair Knox and the other new officers and committee members. Also, a welcome back to Mr. Oakham and Mr. Kelly to the Board of Investments, and have a good month. We'll see you next time.
Okay, with that, Linda, I assume we're ready to go into executive session. So we'll take a couple of minutes.
Yes, let's do
Get
that.
everything sorted out. Thank you.
Thank you.